So why don't you go first, Ida?
All right, my name is Ida Allen. I am the president and founder of Richmond Action Alliance. We are a grassroots organization. We're geared around voter suppression, registering people to vote, and restoration of rights.
Awesome. Austin, why don't you introduce yourself?
My name's Austin. I'm a freshman at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. And I've done a lot of things in different political circles in high school and getting involved here, doing things with people here trying to motivate other students to vote and that sort of thing.
Awesome. And Kayla, how about you?
Hi, I'm Kayla. I go by she, her pronouns, and I've worked with several nonprofits in Richmond, Virginia, and they all center around targeting social and racial injustice. And my role is typically to innovate ways to educate and inform the public.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to just kind of get into a pretty informal, casual conversation. I'll ask a few questions, but mostly I'm going to see kind of where it takes us and what we get to. So I will start with Ida. I'm going to ask you if you could speak to how you saw young people mobilize this summer. Yes, okay, sorry. How they mobilize this summer, and do you think this does or can translate into voting?
Yes, the young population, the younger crowd they have definitely been showing up to register to vote, and they're so passionate and so they just have the spirit about them, and they have the power to affect real change. So when talking to a lot of them, we got a lot of high school graduates to register to vote. They're just so passionate, and they're just happy that they have the opportunity to actively participate in our democracy, as their voices and their votes is very important, especially with this election.
Yeah, awesome. Austin, can you tell us about where you are in school and kind of if you've seen the same as what Ida said?
So like I mentioned, I'm a freshman, so I just graduated high school last spring. And so this summer, like I've definitely, along with my peers, been mobilized to more activism than I think previously. And like we've seen that happen with a lot of young people, but at least in my circles, I think for a lot of people that's translated to being more motivated to vote, but not all the time. Like I do think there's still a lot of the same problems we've always had. Like it's somewhat of a complicated process. And so when it's your first time doing it, like this will be my first general election vote in the fall. And so, you know, when it's your first vote, like there's a lot of things you don't know how to do, and especially because you're not at home when you're at college. Mm-hmm. But I think there's sort of an added disillusionment with the system that a lot of people are experiencing. And so there's some frustration, and it feels like your vote's not going to matter. And I know people always feel that way, but I think especially now young people are really feeling very frustrated and almost powerless sometimes. Yeah. It seems. So that's definitely a struggle. And there's other things that like just at the college level are complicated. Like people have busy lives and class schedules on election day. Obviously this year on campus, we're having doing a lot more to encourage early voting, and absentee voting is very big. So there's sort of a lot of factors, but I will say that I think like there's definitely still obstacles to youth voting.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting that, you know, there are these two sides of the spectrum that, like Ida was talking about, how there are a lot of young people who are revved and ready to go, and then there are also a lot of people who are completely disillusioned, and it doesn't feel like there's really a middle ground. Everything is so polarized today, and it's kind of in that realm as well. But if we can, you know, encourage them why it's important, then I think we can really help them to get there. And Kayla, I know this is a lot of what you do. So what would you say to somebody that said what Austin was thinking if they went up to you and said, oh, my vote doesn't matter because elected officials won't work for me anyway? What would you tell somebody that says that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually today had a conversation very similar. I posted like, so have you voted? If so, how'd it go? If not yet, why not? And what's your plan to vote? And somebody commented straight up, I'm not voting. And so I think that in responding, you should always ask first why they aren't voting and just let them explain before you go and try to persuade them to vote. And in that process, I would remind them that regardless of how you personally feel about politics, that these feelings don't negate the impact that politics has on our lives and on the lives of a lot of oppressed groups, kids born into poverty, people with disabilities, people who are victims to state-sanctioned violence. It costs nothing to vote, but the benefit and just voting in general means a great deal to these people. So just making it about the community as a whole and pointing them to those local elections is really important.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
yeah.
That's an interesting point, that your vote does not only, it's not only just for you, you know, and especially for young people, that's true because there are, you know, millions of people up to age 18 that can't vote yet. And so when they turn 18, all of a sudden they have all of this power to, you know, affect what happens in an election, but they've grown up feeling somewhat voiceless. So it's like, how do you convince them of that? Also, Ida, I'm going to turn to you. How, when something happens that is very, very motivating and gets a lot of youth, um, youth mobilized, excited about the process, how, if something doesn't quite go their way immediately, because what, I mean, I've noticed somewhat of a degree, kind of scarcity and patience sometimes. So, you know, young people want things to happen now, 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 but that's not, you know, how it always goes. So, Ida, for the people who have been really active, who you've seen this summer, how would you encourage them to keep going, even if things don't always, you know, go their way, basically?
With voting and everything, it's not instant gratification. It's something that we have to collectively work together. Actively, we have to make sure that we're holding our elected officials accountable. They actually work for us, so I think voting on a more local level is even more important than voting on a presidential level, just because you do have these local officials who, you know, we elect them into office and we have the power to take them out of office. So it's just honestly educating them on who and what and why they're voting for, and making sure that morally that whatever candidate they choose, that they align more so with how they personally feel. That makes any
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, a couple of you have now brought up the topic of local elections, so I'm going to kind of go into that. And what do you think is the best way that young people can get involved in local issues? Because the thing is that when we follow, you know, social media and we're all over the news, it's always, you know, national, national, national. They're plugging that like crazy. So how do we kind of condense the view? Because it takes a lot more research for the local matters, which is kind of ironic because you'd think it is the most direct. So how do you recommend that, this is just for anyone, how do you recommend that people seek out the local issues and get involved that way?
Being on a college campus, it can be kind of hard because you're like in a community, but it's sort of like its own isolated community from like the broader city, especially like with the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. I think that's not always true of colleges. Like sometimes they're more integrated, but I think in our case it does feel very isolated, at least as a freshman. And so I think there's more that can be done to like make sure people really realize like the impact that we have on the community, but also like that what happens in the community will impact us as well. I think we especially see how important that is like with COVID-19, because like having students come to campus at all was a very big decision and has a lot of impacts on the city of Charlottesville itself. And so I think trying to help young people realize that the like how crucial local issues are to them, and even in their own communities. and I think, sorry, just to sort of pivot here, but I think another thing about local issues is that it can feel more tangible, more like plausible, like something really can happen, and like you can see the change with your own eyes in your own community. And I think that is actually something that I feel like could be motivating for young people as a young person, because I think a lot of times frustration comes from it being like somewhat out of your hands, but when it's a more local issue, it feels more relevant to your life, maybe.
Yeah, Austin, I'm gonna stick with you for a second, because I find one of the, and then we'll go back to anybody else that wants to talk about the local issues. But Austin, um, when it comes to that, you're talking about like the barriers, kind of, it feels like this little separate island in your own student government, your own student groups. It's like you're kind of this microcosm of what's going on outside. How do you think that pertains to the fact, like the time aspect of it? Because young people can't really often show up to the General Assembly, and we're talking about the tangibility of it, like go and see it with their own eyes when they have to do classes and homework and socialize and all that they're doing. So can you talk about that, like the time barrier of it all? Do you really have that much, with school and with your classes, do you have that much like mental capacity and schedule capacity to do much of this work?
It feels like somewhat of a challenge, because it's almost like a perspective thing. You get so invested in like the university community and sort of what's happening right now, like your homework and the people that you hang out with who live like right down the hall, and so it's a very isolating thing. So it can sometimes be hard to see beyond that, and to it's a time thing, but it's also a perspective thing, because it's not right in front of you, but yeah, it can be a challenge sort of balancing everything, because what feels important is what's right in front of you, and that's what you make time for, so sort of more abstract big issues feel farther away, and it feels harder to make the time for those things.
Yeah, definitely.
If that answered your question. I hope it did.
No, absolutely. Kayla, I'm going to go back to you. You did not answer the local question yet, right? Where's that item?
Did not.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you speak to kind of, why the local issues might be more important, you would say? Well, first of all, do you think that it is more important to focus on the local issues when rallying young voters than big issues like climate change, gun violence? Do you think those are as effective, basically, as the smaller issues?
I think it depends on who you're talking to, but for sure, I always mention local elections, because no matter if like where you are currently voting is your permanent home or not, the local elections, the sheriff, the school board, the city council, judges, the people who fill those seats in your community have a direct effect on you, the families in the area, and the community at large. So when I ask people what what issues are most important to them, being able to tie that to a candidate, to a current election that's going on, that's always a really good way to pull people in and to get them motivated to vote.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I answered the question.
Yeah, definitely.
If you have any follow-up.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually, you reminded me of something we had we just kind of got to know each other last week, for those of you in the audience. And when we were talking, we had some ideas we were talking a lot about vote411.org, which is the league resource to go on, type in your address, register to vote, check your registration, or find out what's on your ballot. And some people that we were talking to had used it before, and we were discussing the virtues and limitations of it. And one thing, I think Ida, we were going into the fact that Ida wished that there was something a bit more direct, like young people, you don't know if young people will take the time to kind of click on the link and do all the reading and the research. So Ida, would you have any ideas as to like how to get this information directly about local elections directly to young people?
Sorry. Yes. So I think it's a lot of times young people are very impatient, and I know the QR codes have been helping us a great deal for the people that are on the run and on the go. The QR codes have definitely been like life saving, and I think everything has been so digitalized now that when it comes to like filling out a voter registration form, the young people are less inclined to fill that out. So what we've been doing is we've been allowing them to scan a 411 QR code and having them register right then and there, which is, I mean, it takes the same amount of time, but because we are so used to doing everything on our phones, I think 411, that's like a great tool to get young voters to vote.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Austin, do you see local candidates reaching out to the college environment to give them that kind of direct information about them?
Without without endorsing anyone or like, I don't know, towing that line at all, I think there are certain candidates I know for the local congressional district, District 5. We have heard a lot from one candidate. The other, I don't think, is as involved in sort of like trying to mobilize college students and young people. But so like yes and no. Like I think some candidates take advantage of that, and I think some maybe don't. If that's what you what you were looking for, I can elaborate if.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think there's a reason why they wouldn't kind of actively pursue, like those that don't? Do you think there's a reason? Do they trust young voters? Do they see, their intelligence? Kind of, what are you thinking?
I don't know. Yeah, maybe it's like they're worried that the youth vote is not the vote that they want this year. I haven't thought about it, to be honest.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't know, because it seems like there's a lot of power in the youth vote, and I feel like that is something that's important to harness for sure.
Yeah. Do you think maybe just a general question to everything, do you think politicians maybe fall back on the disillusionment? Like they trust that young people will not come out to vote, basically? Kayla, do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Young people are often ignored by political campaigns in general, and
Mhm.
they usually rely on records of youth voting in the past to determine how much they engage with youth in the present and in the future. And so it creates this vicious cycle of the candidates don't think the youth are going to vote or that they care, so then they don't care, and then it goes back and forth. So
Yep.
if the youth don't feel valued about voting, about their vote, they're not going to feel empowered to vote. So the more that we directly engage and connect with youth in general is going to get them more likely to vote. So like these one-off like text message reminders, social media posts, those are great, but they're not the only thing that we should do to get people to vote. We need to be door knocking and making connections and relationships with young voters, bringing them all together to voice their concerns and their issues and to feel
Mhm.
heard and valued.
Yeah.
Because until youth feel valued and feel important in their vote, they're probably not going to vote.
Very, very good point. Ida, were you going to say something about that?
I think the youth vote in general is just very important, as like the youth accounts for half of the voting population, so it is very, very important. Like we have the real opportunity to affect real change, and I mean our life kind of depends on it at this point. You know, now's the time. Like if you don't vote, you pretty much give up your voice to participate in our democracy. So it's extremely important. And like as Kayla stated before, education, we're a nonprofit, so we have to be nonpartisan, but I think the politicians should be out in the community doing more with the youth and educating them on their platforms and things like that to better prepare them, for the polls. And yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. I found that local politicians, local candidates that are kind of doing the canvassing, doing everything, they're having to put themselves more at risk of COVID-19 than say like the big, a presidential candidate might be or a governor might be because those people have their followings already. But
Hmm.
like people, people working for city council, going up and knocking on doors and getting really close to people that are in their houses so they're not wearing masks and it just definitely that complicates the issue quite profoundly. Obviously we're on online doing this today, so how do you think, aside from social media and the texting and phone banking, how have you seen local candidates trying to reach their electorate, and what have you seen work?
If I'm being completely honest, I think that the local candidates have not really been trying to reach the younger candidates. I don't think that they have had a big presence in the community with educating not just the youth but just everybody. There hasn't, like, we have a major election coming up pretty soon, and I'm guilty of not knowing enough about a lot of the mayor campaigns. I mean, the mayor politics who are campaigning, and then also like city council and things like that. I don't think that there has been a very large presence of those leaders in the community.
Right. Do you think, to a degree, we're talking about how young people get very motivated about very broad scale issues, basically life and death issues. And do you find that the local candidates are more focused on things that young people aren't too worried about yet? Like I've seen candidates go door to door and talk about very minor issues in the community, well, seemingly minor issues in the community compared to broader racial injustice. And so when they're asked those huge questions, they're not quite, they aren't national candidates. So what do you think are the most, for young people, like what kind of local issues do they get behind?
Um, that's a good question. I honestly
That's a
haven't
good
thought about
question.
that. I'll come back to you on that question. If someone else wants to take it away.
From my research, at least, there's actually, it seems that youth don't have one single or even a couple of single most important issues. Uh, it seems about like they care about a variety of issues, and it's typically about, at least right now, it's getting back to normal after the coronavirus. It's police treatment of communities of color, healthcare affordability and access. But like those have local, state, and national levels to those issues. I think it's just a lack of education, voter education, because you can vote at 18, but public education is up until 18. So unless we have adequate voter education in K through 12 education, we can't expect anybody who is a young, fresh voter to be well versed in these issues on the local level, or even the state or national level. So I think it all goes back to our public educational institutions have a responsibility that they're not filling,
Yeah,
because there's too many young voters who don't know enough about these issues.
right. Um, Very good point. I would like, especially because, young people, like as young people, we're kind of the closest to high school. So we can speak to that experience to some degree, especially Austin. They give us civics, they give us government class. We stay up to date on the issues. We're told about how the government works. Do you think after leaving school that what you learned about the Constitution, what you learned about the government applies when you leave school?
No, I can absolutely say no. And
Interesting.
the reason for that is because it's almost like in school you learn like the theory, but you don't learn about those in practice. We learn about the basic structure, but they're not related to real life or to our general surroundings at all. I grew up in Hanover County, Virginia, and we did not learn about even who was the name of our high school, which is not the name anymore. It's now unnamed high school because it used to be Lee Davis. But just they don't connect these classes on government and civics to the real life and to the issues. So it's almost like you have an idea of what it looks like, but when you come out into real life, you don't. It's that connection is not there.
Yeah, absolutely. Austin, what were you gonna say? You looked pretty revved up.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like my AP US government class will not benefit me as a voter, really. Like it tells you how things work and like how the science of like politics works, but when you're just trying to figure out like local issues, that's not something that I feel like is encouraged in school. I grew up in South Sylvania County, which is like small-ish, and it was always like politics was always kind of taboo. I felt like I started a voter registration drive like completely nonpartisan through like one of the honor societies, but it was very like I had to like tiptoe around a lot of people just to like try and register voters. And I think the League of Women Voters actually did something there as well. And so that was sort of the biggest like introduction to local issues that we had.
Yeah.
It's very closed off.
Interesting. So do you think that to some degree schools trying to be nonpartisan limits kind of their capacity to engage young people? And also what I've found is that they'll hold when I was a student in government class, it wasn't as much about like the whole class staying nonpartisan. They'd have debates. We could say like, we could speak our truths. We had field trips to Washington, D.C. and going all around, and we aligned with our values. But it's interesting to hear you say, as somebody that was recently in school, that even that education didn't necessarily motivate them. So like the knowledge doesn't necessarily initiate that kind of power.
It was always, there were like a couple students who were more informed and who had sort of their feelings about issues that would be engaged in that kind of thing, but it wasn't the extra step that kids who maybe don't want to be like fully invested in politics need, but like just getting them to vote. I feel like it's not like you don't have to be the most political person ever to be a voter. And so I think like it was almost like that distinction wasn't made. It wasn't like voting is something everyone does. It was like we all should be more educated. But I'm not saying that we should have uneducated voters, but I don't know. I hope I'm getting my point across. And I also think that like teachers and administrators, obviously because of how the rules work, aren't allowed to express their views. But I think sometimes that meant that like it was always like somewhat uncomfortable when politics would come up, or when like social issues would come up in like any class. And so it always felt like there was like a weird wall between talking about issues in school, if that makes sense.
Do you think that this kind of lack of open conversation maybe contributes to the fact that young people aren't as well versed in the conversation when they leave school? So they're either apathetic or completely gung-ho because they don't quite have that training to have the hard conversations between people. Do you think that contributes to these divides, Ida? Any thoughts on that?
No, can you come back to me? Sorry.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry. I was just so sorry to put you on the spot. Can anybody speak to that?
Yeah. It's something, voting is a habit you have to practice. You have to, grow a voter. So if you don't have these engaging conversations about voting, similar to that of racism, it's something that you have to practice talking about and practice thinking about turnout, and so that you can even form your own opinions on voting that aren't just a combinations of what you see and hear from others about voting. If you don't actively engage in these conversations, it'll be hard to be a voter and not separate it from the stereotype of voting, that it's political and that, you know, it's like you either are political and you're a voter, like Austin was saying, or you're not political, so you don't vote. So
Yeah.
I do think it,
I have
it involves that.
Sorry, yeah, definitely. Thank you. I have a question in the chat from Nancy. It says, do youth pay more attention to other youth who are advocating voting? What tips do you have for a group like the League of Women Voters when it comes to communicating with youth effectively?
I just think it's really important that we're educating them as we're trying to get them to register to vote, or while we're trying to, I think we need to be out. There's a strong absence in the community when it comes to voting, and people that are educating voters on why we vote. I think the more you know, the better. I think the turnout would be for young voters if they were more educated, and as Kayla said before, if they were more engaging. And you don't have to be political to vote, but I think it's still important. Like we need to actively educate, even when there's not like a huge election, a presidential election. We should still be advocating for, just education on voting.
That's a good point. And you're reminding me of, it's funny because when I think about this education, and especially during quarantine, I think the most direct method is social media. But everybody's social media, like me, when I go on social media, it's all political, obviously, because I do a lot of this work. But that's my algorithm. That's what I'm being shown all the time. So when I see these people posting about it all the time, there's kind of this assumption like, oh, everybody believes this. Everybody's working, doing the work. And that can maybe cause some people to be sort of apathetic, kind of saying, you know, somebody else will do it. It's not up to me. But on the other hand, people don't see the same news and they may not get anything political. So how do we break those boundaries of like everyone's personal kind of media channels and what they are consuming? That's a big question.
So yeah, so and I also think that lower youth like voter turnout, it's not only like a sign of like apathy. I actually don't think it's mostly that at all. I think it's mostly to do with like systematic barriers to voting and the culture of political engagement in general that has kind of plagued our current and future generations. From what I've learned, the disparities in the youth vote include youth that don't have a college education, the youngest eligible voters, and people in rural areas. And so if you think about that, and then through the lens of reaching them through social media, that might not be the best way to reach them. So I think that the most important thing is to understand these disparities in the youth vote and the systematic reasons, and use that to create innovative ways to broaden the scope of youth voters and broaden the scope of how we reach them. I think that youth-centered like elections are important. If more youth were involved in disseminating the information about voting, like what we're doing right now, that's really important. It kind of relates to like youth on youth mentoring models. Being able to talk, like youth talking to youth about why it's important to vote is a very effective way for the League of Women Voters to get more youth to vote. Having, you know, young people go door knocking and just say, hi, you know, I am with this organization and I'm here to see if you have a plan to vote. And if not, I'm here to help you. Stuff like that is really important. And having youth more involved in campaign outreach is really important. I went door knocking the other day. I'm not going to say for which candidate because we're remaining neutral, but just having more youth engaged in these processes is very important. So I don't think it's about apathy. I think it's really to do with these systematic barriers to
Yeah.
entry.
Well, I also went door knocking the other day, not going to say for whom, but I noticed, I mean, I should have expected this since I was on campus, but there were just, I mean, every door was another college person. And there were so many people that were just like, no, I don't really want to talk about it. And you were talking earlier, excuse the, the zooming by car, but you were talking about this vicious cycle, and which I really appreciated. And when you're talking about the systemic barriers, there becomes a stereotype. Like it's not this the apathetic young person is the stereotype when it's really just they don't have as many opportunities. And then you were also talking about kind of the youth on youth. I'm going back to a previous conversation because I had a question about this for you. We're talking about like what is effective education. And I think that school tries to do, that active engagement in government by doing SGAs and student elections. What do you all think is the barrier there? Like, why doesn't it translate?
Can you repeat your question for me?
Yeah. I think that schools try their best. Their idea of engaging young people in the process is not putting them into the process, but like kind of creating one that's more, their friends are running for student body president, so they elect their friends, and or those people kind of go and uh, you know run a campaign for their students. So like schools try to do this. So why does that not, I don't know, why is not that not effective in teaching them, like, how it's fun and important to vote, basically?
I think that model doesn't involve complete participation. It's kind of optional whether you want to participate or not. And so I don't think that's comprehensive enough. I think that's a great add-on, but I think in general, civic education in K through 12 schools, not only does it look different depending on what school you go to, if you go to school like in the middle of the city versus if you go to a school in a rural county, it doesn't look the same. And so I think that, I could go on and on about education reform as that's what I studied in college, but we need strong, comprehensive civil education that looks the same for all students, regardless of where they live, what they look like, and what type of education they're receiving, whether it be at home, private, or public. So yeah, the school elections are great, but they should be just an add-on. That should not be the solution.
Yeah, very good point. Anybody else?
Just quickly, I mean, I absolutely agree with Kayla. I think it needs to be like, I think that needs to not be the only thing that like the public system does to educate kids about voting, because I don't know, just to speak to like my recent experiences with this in the past, like in my high school years, I guess, it always felt like arbitrary, and so it like starts that precedent immediately. Like,
Yeah.
this is silly. Like, this isn't important. Um, and I think also like it's almost a little insulting. Like, it's like a dumbed down version of voting. Like, oh look, you can learn how to vote, when it's like filling out a Google form and an email.
Talking about real elections, they're just like shoving that down your throats when that's, it's about.
I remember when I was in 5th grade, my school actually made everyone vote, like mock vote for the presidential election. And I still remember that to this day, that, I voted this way, and in my school, this person won. Like, it was the McCain versus Obama presidency that year. And it made me engaged. So the school elections, voting for your friends is great. Like Austin was saying, that's arbitrary. But if you relate it to real life, what if they actually mock vote for these elections, like the same ballot that would be the ballot in their district? That would make a lot more sense in terms of being able to educate voters. Like, that would teach them how to look up their platforms, and it would actually be real. It would be relatable to their real life, and that would get them engaged way sooner.
And that's such a good point, because I don't see fifth graders as being, they learn about these candidates and they go and have extensive debates about the morals of each candidate. They just kind of, they know what they like, and that's that. So it seems like starting off that way, you said you remember that to this day.
I do.
It kind of gives them that spark early, but then when they're older and it becomes more divisive, they aren't, I think school tries to avoid that conflict that can happen later. But when you're a fifth grader, it's probably not going to happen. Yeah, these are such, I don't know, we're covering so many awesome things. I want to open wait, Anna says, good idea. That is a space that the league could support in the schools. Thanks for the spark, Kayla. Yeah, I mean, I think like whoever thinks about voting education, we start thinking about voter education right before they register. So we're, in high school, I know some teachers will give all of their students a form and say, like, this is graded, you have to register. But what if we started it even earlier than that? Can we talk more kind of about the implications of starting like really early?
Yeah, I mean, that goes on the notion of growing a voter.
I love that idea.
So it's definitely, and that's how you would address parts of these disparities in voting, in that the youngest voters, the 18 through 20, are actually the least likely to vote within the youth voting
Right.
Group as a whole. So I don't know if there'd be any negative implications besides, parental reactions and whatnot. But I think that facilitating conversations about voting is different than a teacher or an educator putting in their view. I think those things look very different. And that, should be explicitly said when addressing any sort of parental or familial backlash when it comes to talking about voting at young ages.
It's interesting when you said that just now. It reminded me that back in the day when I was in 8th grade, I was in debate club, and we had 4 years after the Obama McCain campaign, we had a debate about the Romney Obama campaign, and everybody, I was really wondering of like, oh, is this going to be really controversial? Are parents not going to allow this? But then I was shocked to see, it went through. We had the conversations. I debated people that I then went to high school with and became friends with, because we can discover those differences, but also capitalize on our similarities. Let's see if we have anything in the chat. I don't think
Because it
so.
also describes your values. Just when you talk about voting and stuff in general, that it enables people to reflect on what their values are and then connect with other people who have the same values. So it sounds like that happened when you were debating as well, which is great.
Yeah. Let's see. Anybody? Ida. Let's see. Can we talk about more about your thoughts and viewpoints and research about the power of the youth vote? Like what you think, if everybody got involved in a perfect system, if every young voter was out there, what kind of change could happen? I think you're muted, Ida. You're fine.
I say, so people say there's strength in numbers. We would use the power to really affect real change and to really sway the vote. And I think it's just, it's so important, but the likelihood that the young voters are going to actually get out and vote is very slim. Older people are more likely to get out and vote. And I think not voting comes from lack of education. There's no, other way to explain it. And I think that if they knew better and they did their research, they would do better and actively participate.
Yeah, Right now, I think that education is mostly about like how to vote. So I want to ask really quickly how each of you have voted or intending to vote. And before this, we have 11 or 12 days until the registration deadline, which is crazy. This year has obviously flown by. So really quickly, how are you guys going about voting this year?
I
I'm
actually already voted already, so I voted in person. So
Okay, cool.
I am voting in person on Monday. I made on my Facebook post a comment. I was like, I'm holding myself accountable by writing this comment. I am voting on Monday at this time. And if you don't see me post my selfie with my sticker, you better call me.
That's so smart.
And I will be voting absentee by mail. So my ballot's right there. I'm gonna fill it out this evening and get it mailed. And then
Awesome. Yeah, that I was reminded of a question by you saying something about vote by mail, and it also reminds me of Anna's question here in the chat. She says, what methods of voter suppression would you all highlight in terms of youth voting? And I think a lot of it's kind of scary to vote by mail. It's not, it's just for anyone. There's this kind of there have been these changes that make us feel like it's not quite safe to do so. So do you think suppression, that kind of like that knowledge, that awareness is a type of suppression, or what other types of suppression do you see?
on the college level, I can say just the sheer complexity of it is very complicated. Also, because I think some kids want to register to vote like where they're going to college instead of voting at home. And so that like adds an extra layer of complexity trying to figure that out. Um, but also, and like I think there's a lot of concern with the vote by mail situation, which personally I think it's going to be, I think it's going to be good. But there's a lot of mistakes you can make and your ballot can get thrown out and things. So I'm definitely worried about that.
Yeah.
I actually have some things I have to figure out with that before I mail it because I'm not sure. Not sure. So like
let's
evidently there are
anybody that watches the video, let's see, to send it really early. You have to make sure to fill in the bubble all the way. What else? I think those are the main things. If anybody can think of anything else. Anna, oh, good one, Anna. Black pen. Yeah, they don't, sometimes they don't say it. And I think that varies from state to state, but, or they'll say one thing on the website or on the ballot and it's actually not true. Oh, Anna's coming through. She says, put it in the ballot envelope properly. No naked ballot. Carol says, do they know that the sooner they fill in, the better? So if there's a problem with their ballot, they can correct it before the deadline. That's important. So literally as soon as possible, vote. And one of my favorite tactics that I've heard about, I was talking to the registrar's office the other day, and I found out that people up until October 13th, which is the registration deadline, people can actually go to the registrar's office, register, walk down the hall, and vote. And I think for young people that are worried about their schedules, don't have much time, I think that's perfect. You can go, and there hopefully won't be as long lines now. Although I remember I heard the first 4 days of early voting in Virginia, 69,000 people had voted.
amazing.
So definitely, definitely effective. But sorry, I'm hopping off my soapbox, taking too much time myself. Kayla and Ida, what do you think? Are there any other methods of suppression that are pretty prevalent right now?
Yes. So in terms of voting by mail, youth of color and youth with no college experience, as well as youth in rural areas, those three groups are the three least likely to vote by mail. And so broadening the strategies for getting people to vote by mail is important, and just making sure that there are clear and accurate instructions and information. So I don't know what that looks like. We could innovate lots of different ways to do so, but just keeping in mind those who are least likely due to like the statistics, like with that in mind, how do we reach those voters? And so like Austin was saying, it feels complex, but I actually read a statistic today. I'll read it right now. It says nearly all youth who voted by mail in 2016 found this process somewhat or very easy to navigate. 94% said that, and 80% reported that the ballot drop-off locations were very conveniently located. That might look different this year due to the coronavirus pandemic, but it seems like something that if you scaffold them through the process, maybe having some youth, showing youth how to vote by mail, there are different strategies that we can do to get these demographics of youth to vote by mail. And once you vote by mail the first time, you can get automatically enrolled to receive an absentee ballot every election cycle, which is really nice.
Somebody to that point, the kind of, I think you said youth you said something about youth telling youth, and somebody asked in the chat, would a YouTube video actually physically showing filling out an absentee ballot be helpful, or like a video on another platform?
For sure.
Yes, definitely some type of tutorial that pretty much explains everything that you need to know about absentee ballots, when you need to request them, when you need to have them filled out. I think that will definitely be very helpful. But also what I noticed with getting a lot of youth to register, a lot of them, they aren't aware of where what district they live in, and also a lot of them don't have cars. So I have recently teamed up with a few other organizations, and we're going to have 10 vans on November 3rd taking people to and from the polls. So it's called Storm the Door Project. It's on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you have any questions, you can reach me at iallen@the richmondactionalliance.org.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I had something to say and then I forgot it. What was I going to say? Oh, that is a great point, because for college students, and we don't have too much more time left, but for college kids, I know it's hard for them sometimes to know whether their voting address is home or school, or whether changing their address when they move affects their tuition, their scholarships, everything like that. I had people asking me in June, I just realized that my absentee ballot that I requested, because I'm, home with my family, not at college, it got sent to my college. So that defeats the purpose. So people just don't quite know how to go about that. And I think that's important to check their registration now. And also, if they want to change their registration, then talk to their financial aid department at their colleges, because that's so specific to everyone. Just like Ida just did, if anybody you have any, like, how people can contact you or things going on, or how they can get involved in your organization, anybody that's watching, or organizations that you've been involved with?
Oh, me. So I have been involved I've partnered up with the various organizations to help register people to vote. Justice Reformation, the CAM event, Richmond for All, Diversity of Richmond, Black Pride RVA, Virginia Union. And you can reach us. We have the website, the Richmond Action Alliance .org is the website. And then also you can visit our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, the Richmond Action Alliance.
Yeah, and I'm kind of a floater. I work with lots of different organizations, but I can be a really good resource for pointing people in the right direction. So if someone has a question really about anything related to voting, getting involved with Richmond related organizations, even Charlottesville to an extent, since I also just graduated from UVA and was involved with organizations there as well. I can be a resource, and I'll put my information in the chat, like my contact info.
Anna says in the chat that we will get that information out to our members if they need help. Austin, do you have anything you're associated with, or would like anybody to follow you on social media or anything?
Well, I'm still sort of finding my place here. It's been interesting, adjusting, and things are very weird right now because we're online but still here. And so so not really right now, but I will definitely stay engaged and try to encourage as many of my peers as possible to get out and vote.
Yeah, definitely. As far as league, you can go ahead and follow us at LWV.RMA on Instagram. I believe it's LWV_RMA on Twitter. League of Women Voters Richmond Metro Area on Facebook. All that jazz. Find our website from our social media links. And just kind of a rundown really fast. Register by October 13th. Early vote now until Halloween. Spooky. Spooky how fast that is. Am I right, ladies? And November 3rd is election day, but it's not really election day. It's been election month and a half. So make
The
sure
election deadline.
that's the election deadline. Exactly. That's your plan Z, is to go on election day. You can also deliver your absentee ballot if you can't send it in by the deadline. Deliver it to the registrar by 5 p.m. I believe, or 7 p.m.
Yes.
On I'm having nods. Yes, 7 p.m. or yes, 5 p.m.
Yes, 7.
7 p.m. on election day.
Yes.
Because that's when polls close and that's when poll workers start to count everything up. So am I missing anything? I think those are all the dates and deadlines. Black pen, fill out the bubbles properly in the envelope, find a drop box, go in person to register, and then in person to vote. There are so many ways to do it. Figure out look at your schedule, figure out what's best for your life, and go from there. Any last words from anyone really fast? We have like 1 more minute.
Share your vote.
Yes.
Post it everywhere.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Post how you did it.
Yep. Those social media, the stickers on Instagram that you can literally tap and go register. I think those are awesome. Anything else? Austin, any last words?
This was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you all so much for helping me out with this conversation. You have such awesome information, and I'm so glad to kind of extend this conversation of young voting beyond myself to the League of Women Voters. So thank you all. We'll be in touch, and have a great night, great weekend.
Good night.
Have a good night. Thank